Welcome to POWAtalks. This is our second component of our series. So we're very excited to have everyone here tonight. Thank you for joining. And if you came to the last one and this is your second one in a row, congrats, you've made it. Cool. So before we get into things, I'd just like to start by acknowledging that the country we live on and join together to protect is stolen land. The beautiful catchment we've come here today to learn about extends across Dharawal, Yuin, Wodi Wodi and Gundungurra country, and I pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend those respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here tonight. In what we do, Protect Our Water Alliance tries to stand in solidarity with all First Nations people fighting for justice, self-determination and sovereignty. I invite you to root what you learn from tonight's talk in this acknowledgement of country and deep respect for 60,000 years of custodianship of Aboriginal people by Aboriginal people. Please also let us know in the chat the country you're calling in from this evening. So you can do that by clicking on the speech bubble at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And yeah, just let us know and acknowledge the country that you are on tonight. There's our acknowledgement. And yeah, so some housekeeping before we get any further. So please remain on mute for the duration of tonight's talk to avoid distracting background noise. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, so hold on until then. If you have any technical questions or general questions, post them in the chat rather than interrupt the presentation. And Andy will be keeping an eye on the chat as well as Kay, and they'll be able to help you out. So yeah, welcome to POWAtalks. Before we introduce our amazing presenters, I'll just give a brief rundown about POWA. So POWA is short for Protect Our Water Alliance, and we're a grassroots organising group formed in 2019 in response to ongoing mining beneath Sydney's water catchment in land of the escarpment. So since then, POWA has been working hard to raise awareness about mining that goes on and its damaging impact, and mobilise people in our community to take action against the various mine expansion proposals. We meet regularly on a fortnightly basis, so if you're interested in getting more involved, please reach out and come along. So some updates and a little bit about how you can get involved. Some recent campaigns we've been working on have been to stop Russell Vale Mine, where work has recently restarted, as well as to stop the extension of Dendrobium Mine, which affects the Corder Reservoir and Catchment, Avon Reservoir and Catchment, as well as Pheasant's Nest Weir Catchment. So last year, the Independent Planning Commission rejected South 32's application to extend Dendrobium Mine, and that was on the back of a lot of work from POWA and other organising groups to mobilise people to make submissions opposing the application. However, legislation introduced by the Nationals and agreed to by both major parties undermine this decision by granting the project significant state infrastructure status, which means that the approval of the mine now rests solely in the hands of the New South Wales Planning Minister following the release of an environmental impact statement. So in some big news, Dendrobium's environmental impact statement has been published on the DPIE website today. It's up for public exhibition until June 14, so the community has until then to send in submissions against this disastrous expansion of mining. So POWA will be releasing a guide to help with submissions very soon. And we just ask that you stay tuned and follow us on our socials to be ready when we do release this guide, and go ahead and make your submission and tell everyone you know to do the same. And there's also other ways you can help by reaching out to help flyering at markets and stores, and also join in any actions and protests that we organise. Cool, so I will get into introducing our presenters. So tonight we're joined by Dr. Ian Wright and Tom Kristensen, who will be generously offering their knowledge on a couple of fascinating creatures in the Sydney water catchment. First up, we'll have Ian, who is a science communicator, researcher, and lecturer in Western Sydney University School of Science. His research focuses on freshwater ecology as well as water science and management. And he'll be sharing with us his knowledge of aquatic invertebrates in the water catchment and how mining impacts their capacity to thrive. And following Ian, we'll be hearing from Tom, who studied ecology and now does inspiring work as a citizen scientist, surveying koalas in Heathcote National Park. We'll be learning from Tom about the under-researched koala population in our catchment and why it's so important to protect this vital habitat. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and pass the mic on to Ian.
And I can't find my PowerPoint, although I did in our practice.
Oh, good.
Can I suggest Tom goes now? I'm going to have to.
No worries. If you're ready for it, Tom. It looks like you're on mute.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. Share. Yep. Click on that.
There we go.
Now go to your PowerPoint. And start this.
How's that?
Beautiful.
Okay. Well, here we all are. I'm in Dharawal country. Most of the work that I've done is in Dharawal country, but today I was in Gundungurra land on a field trip, except it's not actually a field out there. It's quite rugged, steep land, nothing like a field, which is quite interesting so far as koalas are concerned, because people have previously assumed that they don't like rocky terrain, they like the flatlands, but we've found otherwise. So, this is one of the 3 koalas we found today. This is a little joey, and it's just recently separated from its mother. It's probably a female. It's very cute. I could spend all night just talking about koalas, but I'm going to have to get onto some more heavy stuff. But before I do that, this is something else I found today, which is a Macrosamia. Most people can think of that as a plant that grew up with the dinosaurs. The interesting thing about it is that there's no animal left that distributes these seeds. So it's sort of a plant that demonstrates extinction. So far as koalas are concerned, predators are probably human beings. So when the settlers came here, they didn't find a koala for 40 years. It sort of suggests, yeah, they are hard to see, but it also suggests that maybe they were being hunted here before the settlers came. And then the koala population reached a boom in the middle of the 1800s, and there was a big fur pelt trade. As many as 7 million pelts were exported because they're very good in cold climates, they're waterproof. And then we had extinctions. After the 1950s, you know, koalas were protected a bit better. So what we might be seeing now is koalas on the rebound. So what interests me is whether koalas in the catchment are actually recolonising the flatlands, the fields. So we all know that koalas need eucalyptus forests. There's some quibbling about which species of trees they like. And we all know that they need water. Well, we don't actually. Some people believe that koalas don't need water. That's a myth. In the 2019-20 fires, we lost a lot of koalas due to the fire, but leading up to the fire, there'd been a lot of drought. Koalas in Campbelltown disappeared. Out at Gunnerdah, there were koalas that were getting assisted drinking from feeding from water stations, and those populations survived while surrounding populations disappeared. So drought and fire, very important. So it's possible that the water catchment areas are actually providing refuge for koalas because there's permanent water in the water catchment, in the reservoirs, and steep rugged terrain, which means that no one can go in there hunting. Yeah, I should mention that in Campbelltown there was a pair of brothers who hunted koalas for pelts. They had 200 dogs. They would set out to find koalas with their dogs, and you know, it's reasonable to assume that they didn't go into the inaccessible water catchment areas. So this koala guapo is sitting in the fork of a blue leaf stringy bark, which is one of their favourite roost trees. So I've put that up there because there's a fork in the road now. I'm going to get a little bit boring and we're going to do some mapping, but there is a reason for it, which I'll get to. So this is a famous map that we all look at. It's the Water New South Wales map of the catchments and the special areas. So the study area where I've been working with my mate Steve, I should mention Steve, he's the master koala spotter, I'm the apprentice. The study area is at the very tip there, the right-hand top side, you've got the Warrenora Special Area. Then over towards the sea, you've got the Royal National Park, and in between is Heathcote National Park. So there's that one Warrenora Special Area in red, and then below that, the much larger Metropolitan Special Area, which has the Dendrobium site in the middle of it. So those two areas combined are almost 1,000 square kilometres. So part of the reason I'm showing you maps is because it's one way of trying to get a grasp on the scale of the landscape. It's an incredibly vast area and koalas are quite hard to see. So you can imagine that working out how many koalas are in these areas would be a lifetime's work. So next slide, doesn't seem to be sharing. So yeah, so the special areas are surrounded with these little signs that warn you not to go in there. There is a penalty for going in. If you look at the bottom of the sign, you'll see that there's a logo from the National Parks and Wildlife Service and a logo from something called the Sydney Catchment Authority. That is a body that no longer exists, but it did do a lot of good science back in the day. You might also notice that there is a sticker over the penalty. $44,000 is what they charge you now. It used to be a lot cheaper. It seems to be going up a lot. So they can afford stickers for the fines, but not for the regulatory authorities. So here's another sort of a map. This is a map that shows you koala records. There are all the little checks there. In the middle is the Heathcote National Park where we've been working and extending up down the Warrenora River. Everything you see there in teal and dark blue was their records that have been entered this year and the previous year. You can see there's a lot of action over at Campbelltown, but there's not much in Holsworthy and there's not much in the Royal. There are in fact not a lot of koalas in the Royal, but we do not know how many are in Holsworthy. So up until last year, it was assumed that there were virtually no koalas in Heathcote. So we just set out to have a look and check whether that was true. And it turns out there's a lot of koalas in Heathcote. But the area is only 27 kilometres squared compared to 1,000 square kilometres in the special areas. A little bit of a zoom for you. Yeah. So Heathcote National Park is supplied by water that comes out of the Warrenora Special Area. There's a river that's continually running. It's unlike other rivers, it's got a permanent environmental flow. So we think that that's what makes it attractive to koalas, the fact that you can always get a drink. So this map here is nicely supplied by the government. It's combining some bionet data there, the koalas, the checks we've already talked about, but the little grey parcels are coal leases. So you can see that the special area, which appears to have no koalas, has got a lot of coal mining leases in it. So given that we've put all that data up in Heathcote National Park. My suspicion is that if similar work was done in the special areas, you would get a similar number of koalas appearing there. That's the Dendrobium coalesce outlined there. I'm going to bore you with this. It's called ICH lease CCL 768. Now, there's a good reason to know these titles, because if you know the title, you can interrogate the databases and get lots of facts from the government about what's going on. So I'll put up the little green banner there. That's the seed mapping resource, which is where you can find all this data for yourself. And the reason I encourage you to do that is because citizen scientists are able to use these systems to enter, or you can't enter it yourself, but you can get data entered and it can change management decisions on how land use is conducted. You need to find someone who will verify your data for you and get it entered, but it's doable. Just a little bit of a closer look at the Dendrobium coalesce. Hardly any records there. It's a massive area. A lot of those records are roadkill. There's Picton Road running up through the top of the lease area. So the new Dendrobium activity is down here. If you have a look out on the west here, a lot of sightings along roadways. That strange little green grid down the bottom. They're acoustic recordings of koalas. This is all this blue stuff reflects work done by the Windjak Council, who are doing an excellent job at estimating koalas out there. So I was inspired to look at Heathcote with my friend Steve because I thought the Dendrobium EIS was so deficient. And here's just a little bit of what I found deficient about the koalas. That they'd done 10 hours of spotlighting looking for all arboreal mammals, and they thought that gave them a grasp on koalas. They couldn't find any. They relied on desktop ecology. So those maps I've been showing you, that's what the consultants doing the EIS, that's what they were working off. So they conceded that there was koala habitat, and they conceded that it was undermined, and they conceded that they were losing 10 Olympic pools of water per day. But they didn't think that that would be affecting the lives of koalas. And as we've discussed, koalas do need water. So in times of drought, those upland swamps that filled the little water holes that koalas could go to drink from, they would be drained, the water holes would be cracked. So the koalas would, in theory, have to move to the reservoir, which in koala terms is a long, long way away, and they may not all want to share the same territory down at the reservoir. Anyway, so the EIS has this thing called koala biobanking, where they concede that damage can be offset by looking after koalas in another part of the lease area, which is kind of bizarre. And they came up with a shortfall of their koala credits, and then offered $30,000 roughly in compensation, essentially. So that was the impetus of why I decided to do a little bit of citizen science. So I got back from this field trip today and had a bit of a look at the current EIS, the one that's just hit the Department of Planning and Environment portal today. And it's a little bit deficient. There's really no difference between the new EIS and the old EIS. They've done a little bit more field work, but the thing that I found objectionable is that they've escaped having to consider koalas as vulnerable because of some timing loophole. So everything in this new EIS is just pretty much the same as the old EIS, despite the new listing of koalas being vulnerable. I will just leave that slide there for you to digest for a second. There's some really strange stuff there about how they tried to identify koala habitat as being the places where they found koalas, but since they didn't find any koalas, then there can't be any koala habitat. It's quite bizarre. So, having been inspired by all that malfeasance, sorry, don't sue me, we set off to Heathcote. So this is just a little bit of what Heathcote looks like. there's a lot of trees there. And in theory, there could be koalas in any one of those trees. There could be 3 koalas. How do you find them? Well, that's what we have been doing since July last year, trying to work out how to find them. By just zooming in to show you, there's lots of trees there. So the first step in finding a koala is to find a tree with scratches on it. And this is a very well scratched tree. It's not possums, it's koalas. You can see there's scratches on all ages of the bark, showing that that tree is getting used a lot. Then, having found a tree, you've got to find some scat. I've got some scat there. The very top one is actually a ringtail possum, so don't be fooled by that. That's just there as a comparison with a little joey scat, which is pointed at each end and ridged. So that's how you tell a koala scat. They're pointed at each end, and they will have little ridges. And they smell delicious. They smell like eucalyptus, whereas possums smell like shit with a bit of eucalyptus. So having found your scat, then you find a koala. I put this here to show you what koalas don't look like, because they don't normally look like this. They normally look like little indistinct fluffy things high up in the tree. They don't pose for photos beautifully, hardly ever. So this is a male Zaphod, and he's been seen a few times. He wanders around here and there, and he's very handsome. So we give them names so we can remember who they are. If you find a mother and joey, then you are doing really well, because that shows that it's a healthy koala population, that they're not itinerants, they haven't migrated from Campbelltown, they live here, this is their land, and they're thriving. So, the way we identify the individuals, so we can give them names and so forth and count them, is by looking at the pigmentation of the nose. The dark pigment meets the nostril, and there's a very distinct pattern between those two, and it's different for every koala. It's like a fingerprint, similar kind of thing that exists on the flukes of whales that you can also use to identify them. So we've found that we can pretty much tell them apart by the nostrils. The trick is to get them to show you their nostrils. They don't like to look you in the eye generally. The nose being between the eyes, that can make it hard. They want to look the other way. But we have ways of tricking them into showing us their noses. It helps to have 2 people.
Just letting you know, Tom, that it's been about 15 minutes.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all good.
Okay, so there's a nostril shot. You've got to get your nostril shot before you can move on and find other koalas. So we've developed a method where citizen scientists can survey koalas. We've identified and mapped 83 koalas, recorded 150 sightings, innumerable scat sites. We've confirmed that koalas like to be near the water, that they like the trees that grow in the water. We engage with various land managers, and they're all really keen. They're all on board. They're all helping to develop management strategies for our local catchment koalas. So, you could, given the number of koalas we've found, you could then extrapolate how many there might be in various areas. There might be as many as 3,500 koalas in the metropolitan special area. And that's not an outrageous estimate, given that the Wingecarribee and Wallandilly councils have found 4,000 koalas out west of the catchment. And they also point out that most of the koalas they find are close to the catchment lands. And indeed, in 2007, when the government did fund science into the koalas in the catchment area, they admitted that the populations from between the Avon and Nepean were likely the largest populations south of Sydney. So I think that's about it. We did write a report, which you can find and read. It's hosted by the National Parks Association, and I do recommend that report that was put out by the Department of Environment and Climate Change, together with the Sydney Catchment Authority, the Sydney Water Catchment Authority. That's an excellent source to read up. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks so much, Tom. That was great. So we'll just, if you do have any questions related to Tom's presentation, just hold on to them for the moment, and we'll have a Q&A session straight after Ian. So I'll hand over to Ian now. So Tom, you just have to stop sharing for the moment.
Yeah. Like that.
There you go.
Okay, can you see that, Claire?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank God. Thanks for stepping in, Tom, and you're a hard act to follow. That was fascinating. So I'm going to talk about the creatures of the catchment, and interpretation of the catchment stretches somewhat into the Blue Mountains World Heritage Area. Large part of the Warragamba catchment is co-declared, and slides I'm showing tonight come from Darug, Dharawal, Gundungurra and Wiradjuri land. And I've been very privileged. This is the Gross River in the middle of the Blue Mountains World Heritage Area. I've been very privileged that some sites remain somewhat less disturbed than others, so that we can actually see the difference. I've just put this one in, Redbank Creek Picton. This is what longwall mining looks like when it impacts a creek, a surface water creek. Now, this is not water catchment. That is, unless you drink the water from North Richmond and out of the Hawkesbury River. But how can you have creatures living in this if you've got no water? The hydrology of this creek has changed after the extensive fracturing. Who knows how deep they go? But when the water returns to the surface, see those pools on the right? Because there is such a high concentration of metals and minerals in that water, that process is actually stripped of oxygen. And I've got some of the lowest dissolved oxygen levels recorded. So basically, the only creatures I get living in those pools are mozzies. Mosquitoes as larvae and pupae are air breathers. So I put that in, and just to labour the point, that's from today's announcement about the dendrobium, revision of the dendrobium plan. How could that possibly go wrong? I do research on Redbank Creek on mine subsidence and the impact on waterways, because I don't want to get that $44,000 fine going in the water catchment. I love that picture that you showed, Tom, of what's prohibited in the water catchment special areas. You'll notice that mining wasn't prohibited there. Just reflect on that for a second. I'm also going to be talking about swamps, partly because there's such an important feature. And I know your last talk by Tanya was about upland swamps, but I'm really into the creatures in these upland swamps. They're really important for our water catchment and also for the ecosystem around. Now, I've studied them particularly in the Blue Mountains, and a large part of the swamps on that side actually drain down into the Warragamba special area and its waterways. But that swamp above, most of the upland swamps in the Blue Mountains and in the Warragamba catchment were burnt in the Black Summer fires. This is a swamp I've been following for about a decade, and sadly this swamp actually dried out. A swamp is, a cross between a terrestrial and aquatic environment. Basically, it's saturated. But at the end of that drought, it dried out to such a degree, what we had when it burnt was the peat caught fire. It dried out. Ask anyone of an Irish background. Peat is a really important fuel source. Keep it saturated, it won't burn. And then after the fires, and yes, there were lots of peat fires, we had intense rain, incredibly intense rain, when the vegetation was lost. So that's Rani Carroll, PhD student, standing at a tussock, a clump of button grass that's been burnt away. But it gives us some clue about how much peat was lost after those fires up in the Blue Mountains. There's Rani and my colleague Jason Reynolds taking a section, cutting some sediment out. That's what it looks like. That sediment in a swamp supports a unique biodiversity. So up in the Blue Mountains, the upland swamps there have their own species of lizard, the Katoomba skink, or Blue Mountain skink, or Lura skink on the left. That's the only place it lives. And along with a lot of the Illawarra swamps, it's a habitat for the giant dragonfly, Petalura dragonfly. They're big. That's not quite to scale, but you know, if you've got a young child with you, hold them firmly. They're big, majestic animals. Peat. The peat is decomposed vegetation that's formed under acidic, low oxygen, waterlogged conditions, and it accumulates at about 1 millimetre up to 2.5 millimetres per year. This is basically solidified carbon. When it's dried, it's about 40%. But sadly, we believe, and a lot of the other swamp researchers, that it's actually, we're losing peat rather than gaining. So part of our concern with climate change is that it's drying out as part of this extreme weather and then catching fire, but also when it's burnt, it doesn't have the protection of the vegetation to hold it together. But picture I don't have there, when you do research in swamps, they target me with leeches, which everyone else seems to find very, very funny. So swamps and also the creeks. I'm now going to show you a bit of the invertebrate life. So one of my favourite things with a group of caddisflies, these are basically freshwater's answer to the hermit crab. The caddisfly will sometimes make a case, it actually secretes a kind of a silk, and it's chucked a few grains of sand in that. And just the front legs, it's an insect, so 6 legs, and the thorax and head stick out, and the rest of the abdomen is hidden in there. Caddisflies, order Trichoptera, if you like, family Hydroptilidae, these are very sensitive. So the polluted creeks, the disturbed creeks, or polluted, disturbed swamps, we don't tend to see many of these. And here is another gorgeous caddisfly. Again, from the order Trichoptera. This is a free-living dude. It's a juvenile, and it's actually adapted to fast current. So on its terminal segment, it's got this beautiful hook, which basically helps it hang on when you get that fast flow. A lot of these animals are adapted to fast flows, and it's also very, very sensitive in terms of disturbance or water quality. So it helps us understand what lives there. Another caddisfly, they are a really, really diverse group. And this one, each species that makes cases has its own architectural plans. So this one has a slight curvature to it, and it will actually glue together sand and quartz grains growing in size to give it that slight conical shape. I think that's from the family Koalas, but they're a tricky group. And I looked at that one a long, long time ago. Can't quite remember. And then we have the Hydropsychidae. There's a lot of caddisflies in our streams, swamps. If they're clean, if you leave them alone, but with disturbance, these are some of the species that go quite quickly. And on the right, the Hydropsychidae, it's pretty lazy. It builds these retreats out of what looks like mosquito net. Again, it secretes it, and they put their little cases there. These are the little houses. It's an underwater photo of their little retreats. And the opening, the funnel, is looking upstream, and then they filter out particulates and eat them. They're lazy. They're what you'd call collector-gatherers. Now, if you get a bit of altitude, we can get stonefly. Stoneflies, to me, these are the hippies of the freshwater creek world. They're very athletic, not stoned flies, stoneflies, order Plecoptera. They love cool water. They're from in the fossil record, they're hundreds of millions of years old. They've got a good design and they just keep it going. But they've got these filamentous gills at their terminal abdominal segment coming out. And I once showed a primary school class and a girl said, oh, it looks like a little tutu. But that's how it breathes. It actually literally breathes through its bottom. That's its gills. But if it gets too warm or if there's pollution, they're gone. Family Grypopterigidae. And mayflies. Mayflies as a group, this is the one group, if I see them, it's clean. So mayfly larvae, this group live close to eternal youth. They, ephemeroptera, meaning ephemeros, they only live for a short time as adults. Most of their life is as juveniles. These are nymphs, and they have these beautiful gills alongside their abdomen, and they flutter them with a lovely sort of rhythmic style. Very, very sensitive. Most of their life are juveniles, and then they will emerge, stoneflies, caddisflies, mainflies, and fly around for a very short time. And if we compared the age and equalized it, basically in the human world, it would mean that people would become sexually active at about 78 years of age, assuming we live to about 80. So there's food for thought. Wherever you look, you'll find something new. Now I'm looking at high magnification. We're actually seeing strands of filamentous algae. This is from a swamp in the catchment. But I've also got on the right, that's zooplankton. There's a microcrustacean. Wherever you look, there's something new, and much of it is not even described. That dude is not what you want around. That's the pupae of a mosquito. That's what I saw dominating Red Bank Creek. We'd lost all the beautiful looking mayfly, stonefly and caddisflies, and we had things like aquatic worms, mosquitoes. These are midges, non-biting midges, and they're biting midges, blackfly larvae. So it doesn't matter how polluted something is, there's always going to be something in the invertebrate world that will move in, but that often tells a story. And this, I couldn't even fit this under the microscope. This big dude, this is the nymph of a dragonfly. How the heck dragonflies became a peaceful symbol adopted by hippies, I do not know, because they are vicious predators. And I know from when I've caught them and put them near some other things, they are remarkably voracious. So this is another species of dragonfly. It's a really pretty dirty looking specimen. That's deliberately so because it's got hairs all over it that will gather silt and debris because it's a stealth predator. They've got great eyes and they can move with lightning speed. Here's one where I've actually I've folded out the jaws. So the jaws lie under the head, they're huge, and they've got sort of clasping processes on the right that have incredible teeth. Now those jaws shoot out and chomp other invertebrates with such incredible speed. When the wonderful David Attenborough filmed this, he had to cool them down with ice. So that's what I do to look at invertebrates. So one of the studies I did was looking at the Berrima coal mine, which was releasing untreated waste after it shut into the Wingecarribee River, a major river going into Warragamba. So that is the Wingecarribee River on the same day. Pretty proud of that photo on the left because that's actually EPA personnel. Actually got them to come out in the field. William Dove's taking a sample there, top bloke at the EPA. There's the drainage coming out, and that is downstream. Nakia Belma, PhD student, that is the same river. So what were the invertebrates doing? We got a nearly 90% decline in the abundance of EPT. And I've got that key on the right. That's the mayfly, stonefly, and caddisfly. It's just a really quick way to enumerate the sensitive fauna. But they make up, in the catchment, if it's a clean waterway, they'll make up between 30 and 50% of the invertebrates. Downstream in the Wingecarribee, that dropped from about 36% down to about 4.5%. Biggest decline we'd seen in the literature. That's pollution and that's stuffing up the invertebrates. So why are invertebrates important? They're the food for so many other life forms. They're sensitive indicators. They tell a story. So important for life. And I'll finish there.
Wow, thanks so much, Ian. Yeah, super great to hear from both yourself and Tom, especially putting in context how these creatures are so important to the whole ecosystem, but also how they are very much present in these special areas where mining is happening and they're being impacted by it. So thank you. So we'll just have a bit of a Q&A opportunity now. So if anyone has any questions, I encourage you to put on your mic and if you feel comfortable putting on your video and shouting it out, and Tom and Ian can give you an answer, or otherwise you can chuck it in the chat. And if we do have lots of questions, I'll just ask for you to raise your hand using the reaction button at the bottom of your Zoom panel. And that way I can kind of keep track of who's waiting in line. Do we have any takers? If not, can kick things off because I had a question that I thought of during your presentation, Tom. I just wanted to know if you could speak about what research has actually been done, if at all, in the special areas, whether it be koalas or on any other wildlife or creatures in there, and if that's been part of formal surveying or related to mining, or research unrelated to mining.
Well, Ian's probably going to be able to give some answers on this. I know that there was some studies done by Catherine Cunningham, I think, on the difference between undermined and controlled areas that weren't undermined, about water, hydrology. Very hard to get permission to do research inside the special areas. You have to apply to Water New South Wales. It's very onerous. I put up the link to the 2007 report, which was probably the last good science done inside the special areas on flora and fauna. I, of course, would love to get access into the special areas to count koalas. I think I will apply, but I'm not holding my breath. Ian, if you've got something to add to that?
No, not really, Tom. I'm with you. I would be so keen to get in there to sample. It does seem bizarre that it's such an important resource. Particularly the metropolitan catchments have been producing sustainable recycled water, you know, as in desalinated by nature. Century. It would be wonderful to get in there and get some external, independent, peer-reviewed science done, because it's such an important nature resource for wildlife and ecology for the whole Sydney Basin. So I absolutely echo your words.
I'm just wondering, can I ask a question? Sorry, I'll turn, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, Tom and Ian, I've heard this thing about the not being able to access the catchment, and it is, it has an impact that the miners all just get to have their say about what's there or what isn't there, and we're left in the dark. So this is kind of transparency, as Tom has talked to me about in different ways. Is this something? Just talking with a couple of MPs at New South Wales at the moment, they don't know quite, I think, what to push for or how to help. But I'm wondering whether this is one ask that we can be really getting them to make. I'm thinking at the moment of the Greens MPs and possibly Justin Fields, but also there's the Animal Justice Party MPs who voted against the Dendrobium SSI bill. Is that something that you think we could do or we should do?
Well, I think given the endangered listing of koalas, I think most Australians would like to see proper management of koalas. So just in terms of koalas, I can't see why we shouldn't be surveying those populations. hiding them doesn't seem sensible. The koalas, of course, are part of an ecosystem. They rely on trees. The trees that they prefer the most seem to be the grey gums, and the grey gums are associated with moister areas. They're in the creek lines, down by the rivers, up on the ridges where they can collect water from little basins. So the ecologists working for Dendrobium just conclude that the undermining is not going to have an effect on koala populations. They make that statement without looking for koalas and without measuring the effects of undermining on the vegetation. It's just not good enough. It's got to be done better. So, yeah, I think the fact that people care about koalas might be a lever to get politicians to have a look at this. The hiding of our natural assets behind that $44,000 fine.
I totally agree with that, Tom. And you know, I'm in the same position as a lot of people in this room at the moment, but so much of the information and the data on the biodiversity of these priceless special areas, so much of that is actually from consultants' reports. And it drives me insane because the quality of the information is absolutely appalling. Now, some of it is solid, but there's nothing like the robustness of having open, peer-reviewed science and the best subject matter experts, and that's often citizen scientists. This is such an important area of biodiversity. I'm incredibly concerned about subsidence from the longwalls and their effect on both water quality, but also more so the swamps and the permanent damage that can be done there as well.
Thanks for that question, Deirdre. There's a few questions in the chat, so I'll just speak to them. First of all, Kath asks, does anyone know if the state significant infrastructure declared projects have ever been rejected by the Department of Planning? If anyone knows, because I don't know, please shout out or put it in the chat if you do. But that's a good point. I know that the SSI declaration is not usually granted to coal mining projects. So that in itself is an absurdity. And then we've got a couple questions from Cherida. So did you want to speak to them directly, Cherida?
Tom, my first question is to you. Seeing that Wollongong coal growing so many of the trees that for the koalas that are used as feed for symbio, I was wondering, would that attract any koalas down to those trees?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we were amazed to walk through Heathcote looking for the grey gums, because after a while you start looking for their favourite trees. Half of the koala sightings were in their favourite trees. The koalas seem to find the grey gums here, there and everywhere, but they have their sort of what we call the club central zones where they really want to hang out, and the trees are heavily scratched like that one that I showed in the slideshow. Other grey gums, they'll just have 1 or 2 scratches on them, and those scratches can stay there for years. So they're constantly probing the possibilities of where it might be a nice place to live. Yes, if you plant some grey gums, it's quite possible in, 20 or 30 years time, when that grey gums reach some size, a koala might find it. It's theoretically possible, but that's not the same as creating the entire moist habitat that they prefer. And I should add, they don't just want grey gums. They are most commonly found in mixed stands of trees. They want a mixture of trees because they use the different species of trees for different things. So yeah, a mixed proper forest is what they really want. And you just can't grow those. You're so much better to protect what you've got than trying to recreate habitat. I mean, the habitat's there, it's free. All you've got to do is look after it.
My other question was from Ian. I watched a presentation you did a couple of years ago at the Power, I suppose the launch of Power, and you gave us a lot of information on research you'd done in creeks that were affected and polluted by mining. How did you get to do that research in those? How did you get the miners to agree to you doing that in their areas?
Thanks, Charita. Firstly, I didn't ask the miners. I would never ask their permission. I would pick my sites very, very carefully. They're often discharging their wastes, and I'll be frank, they're polluting our waterways. So I would find a publicly accessible spot where I can go downstream, and I love road reserves. Road reserves are fantastic. So I'm the sort of person that crawls around under bridges and things, you know, like a troll. That's a good place I can go put my net. But quite a bit of it, for example, the Wollongambie River, it's in state forest and then national park. So I get permission from national parks, scientific license, and I might sometimes get a little bit close to trespass, but I know some really nice lawyers too. But it's really hard. That photo I showed you of the Wingecarribee River, that was a really, really, really hard place to get to. It was really badly regulated by the EPA, and Boral, the owners of that, once we published it, and I did embarrass them a little bit by getting ABC to come and have a look, but they've now treated that. That's probably world-leading example, and they're actually sending that mine drainage into their cement works because it actually helps it. So we work closest to friends, and I don't get Christmas cards, but we've got a working relationship now and exchange data. So
one of the things also that you mentioned that night was the heavy metals leaching. And one of the things that we were told, I asked at a CCC meeting, what were they going to do with all the slag or whatever the fill after they'd got the good coal out of it. And they said one of the things they could do is put it back into the mine and fill up where they weren't mining anymore. And I then asked, wouldn't that mean that heavy metals would then leach out of there when the water came through? At which stage they said to me, we're only putting back what we got out of there. So would they have heavy metals leaching out of there?
Absolutely, yes. And I'll explain why. Once you stir up coal, all coal has sulfur in it. And once they shut a mine down, the groundwater will build back up. But because you've disturbed the coal and there's sulfur there, creates the sulfuric acid that will leach away and mobilize those metals. And nearly every mine that shuts, and this is what bothers me, often the pollution can get even worse once they shut down the treatment when the mine's active. So when they say they're putting back what was there, it's not in the same form, it's mobilized. And, you know, go a little bit further west into Wiradjuri country at Sunny Corner, the mine's shut a century ago and the metals coming out of there are astronomical. So yeah, I don't buy that one.
Thank you.
All right, Melinda, your hand is up. Melinda, are you still wanting to ask a question? Go for it.
Yeah, I'm going to switch my video off because my internet's very unstable. So apologies if I drop out. Tom, I just wondered, you know, we know that the upland swamps are, you know, endangered, and we know that the koalas are endangered or vulnerable. I just wondered how you would tie the two together, because we're talking about whole ecosystems. So the relationship between the water that moves through the swamps and how that actually feeds the forests, where those areas are located. That's one for kind of both of you, but I want to park that and also ask you a sort of couple of quick, dumb and obvious questions. Like, do the koalas breed in the same trees that they feed off, or will they just breed in whatever tree they can find if they're desperate to breed and the male is chasing the female? Do they need dense foliage to breed? And when the males are moving through the environment, there's this thing that I was taught as a kid, that they move from treetop to treetop. But if they're actually having to move larger distances, I'm presuming that they get run over on the roads because they're moving along the ground. So I guess that the koalas would be using those upland swamps as well to move through. And when they're moving on an area like that, they'd be less vulnerable than when they're moving in cleared areas and, you know, on roads, in mines. They're sort of obvious things. So I wondered if you could talk to that, Tom.
Yeah, that's about a half-hour talk there, right there, Mel.
I always do that. Sorry, Tom.
Yeah, look, koalas are very good at moving from treetop to treetop. That's why rocky ground, the steep ground, doesn't seem to worry them. They can take shortcuts through the trees, but they're also very good at clambering over things. Probably an upland swamp would be probably the least likely place they'd want to walk. That's very dense to go through that. But the swamp is valuable, of course, because it's supplying full-time water, you know, that they can drink, which means they don't have to head right down to the bottom of the reservoir to find a drink. They can live up high. In terms of mating, well, I haven't seen mating, but I have seen them in leading up to it, rubbing noses, and that was just, you know, that was just where the male could track down the female, and I don't think they picked a particular tree for that. They do like dense foliage. I don't think they like it for mating. I think they like it for hiding in, and maybe also for keeping warm in the winter. They like to be up high where the sun's going to hit them, where it's kind of dense, and we call it like a doona effect. The Angophores, they provide a little doona for them. They like it up there. Have I missed anything?
No, what do you reckon they would have done during the drought, though, when it was getting very, very hot and habitat was threatened? Where would they have gone then?
Exactly. So if there's no surface water and there's hot weather, they will reach their limits. They cannot derive sufficient moisture from leaves. That is a myth. And if they have no surface water, all they can do is follow their instincts and try to find a source of permanent water. And obviously, the hotter and drier it is, the further they're going to have to walk to try and find that water. They don't necessarily know where the water is, but they would probably know that they need to go downhill to try to find it.
And would they smell the water, do you reckon, in the landscape?
They do have very big noses, and unfortunately they can't tell us what they can smell, but they smell each other's scent. That's how they work out which trees to avoid, because the scent will hang around on the trees for a month. Whether they smell dogs, whether they smell humans, we don't really know. But yeah, definitely that huge nose has got to be there for some reason. Maybe they can smell water, I don't know.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah.
All right, we've hit our 8 o'clock mark, so I might wrap things up there. There were a couple more questions that have come through in the chat. Good amount of info from Joanna about the coal dumped in bushland at the head of the Georges River, and also about sourcing metallurgical coal. So yeah, if you do have any more questions, just give Power an email. There's a whole resource of people that are incredibly knowledgeable in all of this stuff that have been working on this for a really long time. So feel free to tap into that resource by reaching out. Kay just sent a bunch of useful links to join the mailing list and follow us on socials. And just remember to keep an eye out for the submission guide to the Dendrobium EIS. As soon as we've got that together, go ahead and write your submission and tell everyone you know to do the same, because we need to let this planning minister know that there's no reasonable reason why he can accept this mine expansion. But yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you Tom and Ian again for joining us and sharing with us tonight. And a shout out to Stuart Khan, who I saw somewhere in the attendees, who will be sharing his knowledge with us in the next power session on the 17th of May. So check out the Facebook event for that and register your interest there. Alrighty, good night everyone. Farewell.